Okay, welcome all. I wanted to talk about Reb Shlomo Alkavitz's great contribution that we all still benefit from today. But before we talk about the contribution, I want to talk about the contributor a little bit. So I just want to give a brief introduction about Reb Shlomo Alkavitz's background, and from there we'll move on to the contribution that we want to talk about tonight. So Reb Shlomo Alkavitz is one of the earliest Mekubalim in Tzfas, part of the golden age of Tzfas, who bring Kabbalah from Tzfas originally to Tzfas, and then from Tzfas it gets exported to the rest of the world. So he's a child of a survivor of the Spanish Inquisition, of the expulsion from Spain. His parents were kicked out of Spain. They move around a little bit from Turkey to Syria to Damascus, and then eventually they settle in Saloniki in Greece. And that's where the young Reb Shlomo Alkavitz is raised and educated, and that's where he starts. Now in Saloniki is where he learns. He becomes a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef Teitzak, the Mari Teitzak, who was from the Gedolei Hadar, the Gedolei HaPoskim of the generation. Ad Kedei Kach that the Chida writes that in the Dar of the Beis Yosef, and the Beis Yosef was Zeicha to write the Shulchan Aruch, there were several others who could have, in theory, been Zeicha to write the Shulchan Aruch, but Min Shemayim, because of the Beis Yosef's incredible humbleness, he was chosen to be the one to write the Shulchan Aruch. And one of those who could have been Zeicha, or was on the level of writing the Shulchan Aruch, was the Mari Teitzak. So Reb Shlomo Alkavitz is a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef Teitzak. The Gedolei Hadar in regular limud, not nister b'chlal. And at a certain point, Reb Shlomo Alkavitz becomes attracted to the nister part of Torah. Who exactly his Rebbe is in that regard is not so clear, but he becomes attracted to that part of learning. And Ad Kedei Kach that there's a fascinating story that's brought down that I'll just share to give a little bit of a flavor of who he is and his connection to Kabbalah. The Beis Yosef famously had a Magid who would visit him to tell him different Giluyim and learning. Now, most of the Beis Yosef's Giluyim and learning from the Magid are structured according to the Seder of the Parshias. At least that's the way it was published, up until very recently. Recently, there was another edition that published it structured differently, not based on the Parshias. But Al Kapanim, the Beis Yosef had Giluyim from a Magid on a plethora of different topics, over the year. And this was a sefer that was published, of the Beis Yosef's Giluyim. Now, some of the Beis Yosef Giluyim are a little bit hard to understand. Some of them seem to be Shalei Kedin, some of them seem to be Seis or other things the Beis Yosef writes. It's strangely enough, the Magid tells the Beis Yosef, he instructs the Beis Yosef to prepare himself to die al Kiddush Hashem, because he's going to be Moisei Nefesh al Kiddush Shem Shemayim. Now we know that the Beis Yosef lived a long and fruitful life. I think into his 80s, maybe 88 years old. He died in his bed in Tzfas as a Zaken Sfa Yamim. So he certainly was not Moisei Nefesh in the classical sense. And these are some of the questions that are debated about how exactly to understand when a Magid, gives over Torah, how, I Torah Lev Shemayim, how accurate it is. And that's really a topic for another day. There's a Chidah. Rav Adi has a long tshuva. Rav Margolius has a famous piece about this. Maybe that's for a later date. But Yiach Shia, as a vehicle of a Hakdama or Haskama to the Sefer Beis Yosef, there's a letter there called Igeres Reb Shlomo Alkavitz. It's a letter that Reb Shlomo Alkavitz wrote, describing the Beis Yosef's greatness and the Beis Yosef's ability to connect with the Kabbalistic side of things. And in it, he tells over about a marvelous Shavuos night that him and the Beis Yosef as young men spent together in Saloniki. And he writes about their Seder Halimud. He said they committed as a small Chabura, him, the Beis Yosef, and some others, to stay up and learn the whole night of Shavuos. And he writes that they started learning for some Gemara, some Sukkim, I think he writes, then some Gemara, then some Mishnah, then they learned some Soid. And then he said they learned the entire Mishnah Yisraim. And when they were two Masechtas in, or two Prakim in, suddenly a voice rang out from the Beis Yosef's mouth that had an incredible sweetness to it, a loud and sweet voice. He said, and everybody, the neighbors, everybody who was around in the other rooms, was able to hear that there was a voice that wasn't the Beis Yosef's, that was coming out of the Beis Yosef's mouth, but they were not able to understand or to actually piece together what he was saying. Maybe they couldn't understand the words, maybe it just sounded like a kind of a monotonous sound to others, and only those who were able to hear it were able to hear it, possibly similar to the Gemara with Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa, meaning only who was supposed to hear was supposed to hear. But the Beis Yosef and Rabbi Shlomo Alkavitz were both privy to the words that this voice was saying, and the voice rung out and it said, it was a Magid who came to say, I am the Mishnah. I'm the voice of the Mishnah, Kaviyachal, who's speaking to you and telling you that because of this great ne'imus and the sweetness with which you learned the Mishnayos, I'm being megal myself to you with certain saydis and chayna v'chayna. And he continues on, and it's several pages long in the Sigaris from Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, but he's describing the greatness and the revelations that came to the Beis Yosef through the Magid. But, b'makam shata moitzeg dulasei shel Beis Yosef, shama ata moitzeg dulasei shel Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz. Meaning, by describing the Giluyim that happened to the Beis Yosef, you also see the Kabbalistic ability and the Kabbalistic, alacrity that Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz had, that allowed him to come into contact with Magidim in that fashion. And I think to the point, ad kedei kach, that there's maybe no one else aside from Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, possibly one or two others, who are mentioned as having been able to hear the Magid that spoke to the Beis Yosef. The Magid that spoke to the Beis Yosef, nobody else was able to hear. It was exclusive to the Beis Yosef. These were revelations that only the Beis Yosef was privy to and nobody else. Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz is an exception to that rule, possibly the only exception to that rule, who was able to hear the Magid, the Beis Yosef's Magid, while he spoke to the Beis Yosef. So now, I share this just to give you a picture of Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz's acceptance and capabilities, sai in the regular field of limud, where he was a Talmud of the Mari Teitzak, and sai in his Talmud Chaver Shaf that he had with the Beis Yosef, which was also probably in Nigla and involved Nister as well. So Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz was a Kli Muchshir L'Gdula. He had it all going on. Now, eventually he migrates to Tzfas, and there his younger Talmud and future brother-in-law, the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, becomes his Talmud. Rav Moshe Cordovero writes about himself that till he was 20 years old and he met Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, he learned nothing. Now, I'm assuming that's a bit of an overstatement. The humble, that's humility talking. But he writes, I understood nothing until I met Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, who plumbed with me the depths of Seidus HaTorah and was able to open my eyes and teach me everything that I needed to understand. And they moved on to Zohar, and they moved on to other Ksavim and other ancient Kabbalistic texts, the Sefer Echalas and etc. And he opened up the eyes of the Ramak to see everything. And the Ramak is the one who published some of Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz's Svarim and also his own Svarim, codifying like a Seder of Kabbalah, and from there maybe passes through to the Arizal, who ultimately becomes the main vehicle of Kabbalistic thought. Lurianic Kabbalah becomes the main vehicle of Kabbalah. But these are some of the predecessors and the building blocks that led to the total conquest that Kabbalah took over the world. After this tuf of the golden age in Tzfas. Now, Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, several svarim of his were published. Some of them posthumously, Lamashal, because of the time of the year that we're up to. The Sefer Manos Halevi on Megillas Esther and in Yonei Purim was published by the posthumous later on after the Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz's death. It was published by his family, I think by his brother-in-law, who had received it from Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz as a gift for Shalach Manos, which is itself a topic, giving svarim for Shalach Manos, giving other non-edibles as Shalach Manos. In there, Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz develops some famous themes about Purim that are unique to him. But this is the person that we're talking about. Now, at some point in his life, Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz composed the song of L'Chadaydi the Kraskala that we all know and love, that every Kehillah in Klal Yisrael has adopted since then. And it's a beautiful hymn, to greet the Shabbos with. Now, we spoke previously that the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Kofi Tesam and Aleph describes different Ameroim who would go out to the Sadeh anticipating the arrival of Shabbos. They would say, Bayi Kala, the Gemara Baba Kamal, Lamed Beis, the Gemara in Shabbos Kofi Tes. We described this previously. This is the original origin of the idea of Kabbalah Shabbos. Now, in the Tkuf of the Ga'inim, Kabbalah Shabbos only meant to say Mizmor Shir, Kapitel Tzadik Beis and Tzadik Gimel and Tehillim, which was the Shir Shal Yom of Shabbos, and that was what Kabbalah Shabbos meant. But during this Tkufa, after Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz composed this, all-inclusive hymn describing the beauty of Shabbos and the greeting of Shabbos and wishing for the Geula that's going to come ultimately to which Shabbos is so connected, this tefillah was first quoted in a few Sidurim. It actually made it to German Sidurim is first where it went. It was quoted in the Sefer Tikkunei Shabbos. It was quoted in some early Sidurim. And slowly it caught on in the Ashkenazi world. And then several hundred years later, actually, it caught on in the Sephardi world. But I don't think there is another additional piece to Tefillah that gained such wide acceptance by all cries of Klal Yisrael. Kabbalah Shabbos, which is a brand new invention, so to speak, meaning although it has Shosher Mehari Kedem, it has origins in Chazal and origins in the Ga'inim. The idea of a brand new Tefillah like Kabbalah Shabbos that conquered everything that everybody started saying all throughout the entire world is a meridik chiddush and a big schos, a testament to Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, his enduring legacy in Klal Yisrael. Now, there's several pratim about the tefillah of L'chadaydi that I want to discuss over here. First amongst them is, this is something that again is almost universally accepted in the world, is L'chadaydi something we sing. Now, we spoke previously in a different shir about maybe having music by L'chadaydi, the Minig of Prague, the Meisel Shul, the Altanai Shul, which was itself a controversial Indian that later, what arose during the early battles of the Reform movement in the country Sela Devar Bris, but that's not for now. But the idea of just singing or saying this piyut with some sort of flavorful, zmira or song is something that from its earliest, arrival on the scene seems to have been a part of the transition of this Messiah. For example, some of the early Siddurim that have it say that the song L'chadaydi is to be sung to the tune of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, meaning there was a well-known tune of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi that was, Bakant in that time, Bakant in that area, and the Bala Siddur, the person transcribing it in the Siddur, is instructing people that this tune, this piyut, is to be sung according to that tune that everybody knows. So L'chadaydi and Kabbalah Shabbos as a whole is something that has taken on, from its earliest adoption, has taken on a joyous sense, like a sense of singing, of joy, of greeting Shabbos. Now, it's interesting, I mentioned this before, Rabbi Chil Goldhaber has several articles in Beisar and Yisrael about Kabbalah Shabbos, and in one of them he mentions that there's a medrash that was discovered later on, but it seems to be an early medrash, where it describes HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol having the first Kabbalah Shabbos. And I'll read from you a little bit, because it shows you where this idea of joyously greeting the Shabbos Malchus comes from. It says as follows. The Medrash says, so the Medrash says, Kacheu b'simcha, greet it b'simcha. And then the Medrash goes into an elaborate description. B'shvi, it says, on the seventh day, Yashav HaKadosh Baruch Hu al kisei, simcha, v'hever lefanav sar shel mayim b'simcha gdela. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sat on a kisei of joy, a chair of joy, and he passed the sar shel mayim b'simcha gdela. Then sar shel naharis b'simcha gdela, sar shel harim b'simcha gdela, sar shel gavayis, and it continues. Every contributing sar who had something, who was created during the Sheshis Mea Maisa that he was now going to be in control of, passed by in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu during this tufa with a great joyous, dancing. So to speak, joyfully greeting the arrival of the Shabbos, be it a king or a queen, depends on its description, different midrashim, different rishonim, is something that from the earliest time existed. Now, incidentally, there's a Messiah, and this is a Chassidish Messiah, and I'll use this as a basis to discuss a few of the finer points of the Chadaydi. In Belz, they say over the name of the Sar Shalom, the first Rebbe of Belz. He said as follows. He says when Reb Shlomo Alkabetz composed the song or the pizmin of L'chadaydi, he was masna 3 conditions with which he was going to gift this pizmin to the rest of Klal Yisrael. He says condition number 1 was to leimer apiyat ba'amida, to say the piyat ba'amida. Now I'll go one by one, each one of these 3 conditions, and we'll handle them a little bit. He said the condition number 1 was leimer sapiyat ba'amida, to say this piyat while standing. Now, in certain Chassidish courts, and I think even in Telz, this was the minig. I believe in Telz this was the minig, but particularly by Chassidish courts, they were super makbid to say l'chadaydi ba'amida. In Belz ad kedei kach, I believe that when Reb Shila of Belz was elderly and infirm and was not able to stand anymore for l'chadaydi, he asked them to take him out of the Beis Medrash while they sang l'chadaydi, so that he shouldn't have to sit. I'm sorry. I think what he did is fakir. Reb Shila Belz told them not to sing l'chadaydi, because seemingly the Messiah in Belz was that standing is contingent on singing. But if you're not singing, you don't have to stand. So, but al kapanim, we see a tremendous chaymer that they had to standing during l'chadaydi. Now, incidentally, in the Olam Yeshivas, and this you'll see by even Gedolei Olam, I think that I have a sefer that records the Anhagas of Yashiv and Rav Shach and the Stipler, and each one of those were not makbid to stand during l'chadaydi. So standing during l'chadaydi as a point of mamish, that you have to do is not something that was widely accepted, but it exists. Now, Tanai number 2 that the Belzer Rav said that Reb Shlomo Alkabetz was masna was that they should not talk during the saying of l'chadaydi. Now that one, Puk Chazi Amadabar, I think we could safely say that the idea of not talking during l'chadaydi was also not widely accepted. It's a time when many people catch up with their friends. Maybe that's not the desired thing, and maybe that's not the proper thing to be doing in the shul on Friday night, but I would say Puk Chazi Amadabar, that the Welt was not makabel, the b'chaymer not to talk during l'chadaydi. Now the third one is the one that we started off with the Medrash, and this one was very, very niskabel. The third one he said was that Reb Shlomo Alkabetz was misakin that you have to sing it benigin. You have to lenagna benigin, to sing it with a niggin. And and that one is certainly very, very widely accepted in all of Klal Yisrael. And like we mentioned, even from the earliest times that this minig was just starting to spread in Klal Yisrael, the idea of singing l'chadaydi was very well accepted. Now, I'll just, as a Maramako, I'm not going to go into this, but if you want details on every different Messiah from every different Chassidish accord about what exactly, which type of songs to sing, and the split between the slow song in the beginning and the fast song in the end, Kehillas that sing it all in unison, Kehillas that take a break, Kehillas that chant it, I'll refer you to Rabbi Goldhaber's excellent article in Beis Aaron V'Yisrael. I believe it's in Kuntras Ayin Gimel, where he goes through this ba'arichos, and there's many, many details and nuance that I'm not going to go into in the singing. Suffice to say that the minig to sing it is widely accepted. Sai, where it originally started by the Yekesha, Sai, by where it later migrated. I don't believe that the Sfardim sing it, but they chant it in unison in a sing-song type of method. So that also is Mekayim, the singing. Ad Kedei Kach, I think the Shla the Shla writes, and I think in Kitzer El Shabbos, the Shla writes that you're supposed to joyously greet the Shabbos, but Simcha Rabbah, with singing when you say L'chadaydi. I think they said B'Shar Shavayda writes similar, like we quoted a week or two ago. So the idea of joyously greeting it, Bashiris, with the Shbrachas, with singing, is certainly the most widely accepted Tanai of all the three Tanaim that Rav Shia Lebelza delineated, that Rav Shlomo Alkavitz, was master when he made the song. Now, interestingly, in Belz, the Sar Shalom's Memra held that Amida was the most important. And on that, the Sar Shalom said that if Rav Shlomo Alkavitz would have known that people would not be makbid to stand by L'chadaydi, he never would have shared L'chadaydi with people. But Yiach Shia, that's not the part of the minig that, caught on B'Shleimus. Additionally, everybody knows we turn around by the last to greet the Shabbos. Exactly the pratim of that minig, what direction he's supposed to face, again, is something that has, much nuance. And I'm not going to go into right now. Now, there is one more nakud over here that I want to discuss. There's an interesting Meiser Rav from the Goin about this, or related to this, and I'll tell you what I mean. The Goin, in Meiser Rav, in entry Kuf Tez Zayin, where he talks about Shabbos, the Goin writes as follows. He says, Arvis b'Shabbos, Maschilin Baruch Hu b'Tzibur. Arvis b'Shabbos, we start Baruch Hu b'Tzibur. Now, this is a very strange, bulletin in the Meiser Rav, because seemingly it's miyutar. What does the Goin, or the Mechaber, the Sefer, who's telling us the Menhagim of the Goin, what is he bringing to the table here? What is he being Meisif that we didn't already know? Gans Klal Yisrael knows, Arvis b'Shabbos Maschilim Baruch Hu. So now there are those who say that this was meant to tell you where the placement of Bamem Adlikin is. Meaning there's a Shaila, maybe we'll discuss this in the future, exactly where during Ma'ariv do we say Bamem Adlikin, and possibly what the Madfas of the Sefer Meiser Rav was telling you was that the Goyin's minig was not to say Bamem Adlikin first, to say Bamem Adlikin later, which is a Shver Zach on its own, and we'll talk about it. But Rav Tzrei the Blitzky, in one of his Svarim on Inyani Shabbos, he says as follows. He says that the diak over here meant to tell you that the Goyin did not say Kabbalah Shabbos B'tzibur. You're talking the Goyin didn't say Kabbalah Shabbos at all. But the Goyin did not say Kabbalah Shabbos B'tzibur because the Goyin, I'm just trying to find it. The Goyin, he says as follows. The Goyin didn't say Kabbalah Shabbos B'tzibur because the Goyin was against tefillas that were additional, tefillas that are not musker, either in the Gemara or the Ga'inim or maybe the Rishonim, but some additional tefillas. The Goyin was circumspect, and he didn't want to say those. So the Goyin would not say the tefillah of the Chadaydi. So what the Mechaber of Meiser Rav is telling us is Arvis b'Shabbos Maschilin Baruch Hu b'Tzibur lafuke saying Kabbalah Shabbos. Now, incidentally, the Brisker Rav, who traced himself very closely to the Messiah of the Gra, the Briskas are very, very connected to the Messiah of the Gra, Einikal Chav Chaim Volozhin, and etc. So the Brisker Rav had his own interesting minig, and this again, his children said over. Brisker Rav said as follows: the Rambam, when he describes how an Erev Shabbos in a Beis Yirei Elokim looks, the Rambam says a person should be totally muchan, prepared, dressed, clean, refreshed, waiting, and he should be waiting like someone, with the anticipation of someone who's waiting to greet a king. Which, interestingly, people are medayik. The Rambam refers to Shabbos as a king. Traditionally, in a lot of the midrashim, and the way we refer to Shabbos, at least in the collective imagery of Klal Yisrael, is as a malka, as a queen. Klal Yisrael is the king, and there's a lot of sources on that, a Zohar, and etc. Not for today, but that itself is an interesting nakuda that the Rambam refers to it as a king. But the Rambam describes how you wait, with rapturous anticipation, waiting for Shabbos to arrive, is how a person is supposed to do it. Now the Briskarav ala Torah in Parshas Yisro, after Klal Yisrael say Ritzaynenu Liris Esmalkeinu, Klal Yisrael demands they want to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Moshe Rabbeinu sends them home with instructions, and based on that the Briskarav extrapolates that there are three conditions that a person who's going to greet a melech has to have. There's l'chu chipsu es b'dechem, you have to go clean your clothing, you have to go prepare yourself, hechinu es atzmam, and they have to, I forgot the third condition. But based on these three conditions of how the Briskarav learned from the pasuk in Parshas Yisro, how a person greets a king, is how the Briskarav's personal anhaga of waiting for Shabbos' arrival and his version of Kabbalah Shabbos played out. The way his children described it, the Briskarav would already early in the day prepare himself, he'd be dressed, he'd be getoivelt, he'd be cleaned, he'd be ready, and he'd be waiting, and he would go out to his porch and scan the horizon and see, is Shabbos arriving yet, then he'd go back in and check the clock on his wall, and then he'd go back out and check the horizon back and forth, and he was waiting, Pasha with great anticipation for Shabbos' arrival. And when he would see, Hechsifu and Shabbos is coming and the sky is beginning to darken, he would go inside, and with great simcha, it says, with great joy, he would say Mizmor Shir, and he would say Bayi Kala, and Mizmor Shir, meaning he didn't say the entire Nusach, all the Chadaidis, and all, the Pizmani Tehillim that we say beforehand, which is the selfish shmuz, why we say those exactly, in some Svarim it's brought down that we say 6 Kapitel Tehillim, Keneged Sheshis Yimei Chayil, and then we say the Chadaidi, Keneged Shabbos, but Yirchi, the Briskarav didn't engage in all that, likely like the Minig Hagra, but the description of the Briskarav's, joyous and heartfelt and very intense, rituals of Kabbalah Shabbos is itself something to learn from and something to see. Hagam, it doesn't conform with the normative Kabbalah Shabbos that the rest of Klal Yisrael adapted, but it certainly is a part of it. Now, one more nekuda, and with this I'll end. B'atzim we know the din is in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Lamed Tes Gimel, and Mishmur Paskins like this, and Machmirim are very medactic in how they clap, that it's also to clap and to dance on Shabbos. We know that because we're afraid of Shemi attacking Klishir. Now, the Shaila is, if that's Negei B'zman Hazeh, it's not, that's a halacha sugi for a different time. But what is very common, befrat by Hasidim, and even by regular Haimish Shul, you'll see that it's very normal to clap and to dance by L'chadaidi. So how does that jive with Kilu, the normative halacha, that we don't do that on Shabbos? Now, so there are those who say, and I think I saw this, someone said over B'Shem Reb Shmuel Orbach, B'Shem Reb Shia Kutna, that if a person is doing the clapping and the dancing, derech hisayrus v'dveikus, it's not nechal n'gzeira. Meaning Chazal's gzeira of that, it might lead to something, and that therefore it's not allowed on Shabbos. They only said that by mundane clapping and dancing mundane clapping and dancing. They're afraid that could lead to something, or just you're singing, you're having a conversation with something that's totally dveikus and fully hisayrus and dveikus. He said over B'Shem Rav Shia Lekutna that there's no gzeira on that. Now that's ein zach. Now additionally, I saw, and this is stam interesting to give it a bit of a deeper undertone, is that the Divrei Yecheskel, the Shinavi, used to say over that, and I'll read it for you, Ki al yidei shemetapchem umakin kaf al kaf, this that people clap hand to hand b'l'chadaidi, misaknen eschet ha'yidua, ki kaf, he says hand is b'gematria meya, it's b'gematria 100, v'kaf al kaf masayim, one hand on another hand is masayim, v'arla b'tfila b'masayim, b'tela b'masayim, and arla is bottle with masayim. Now that means arla of a tree, givein lach, but arla is bottle b'masayim, and therefore, this is the clapping by the Chadaidi is a great skula and a great mitaher for specific averis. And I think these are the basic inyanim of the Chadaidi and the interesting development of the Chadaidi over the years. I want to continue onto Bameh Madlikin versus Kegavna, which is also another later edition, and maybe Bechlal. A little bit, we'll delve into the sugya of tefillas of the Zayar, which we mentioned today with Rav Saraya and the Gaon a little bit. So we'll delve into that a little further. Tefillas that come from Kabbalah and their addition to the Seder Tefillah. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.